I am not going to introduce you all. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about everybody. Our first, introducing Mirele Goldsmith. We are really excited to have you, and we're really excited about this session. Mirele, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you to Limmud for hosting this session. And thank you to all of you for coming, including my mom, my husband, my friends from overseas. I'm so grateful to all of you for showing up. Thank you so much. Before we start, I think it's only appropriate to note that it's a very fraught day that today is, and I'm really glad that we're able to have this program and that last night was not another disaster in the Middle East. I'm just going to start with a brief prayer for peace. Compassionate God, bless the leaders of all nations with the power of compassion. Fulfill the promise conveyed in Scripture. I will bring peace to the land, and you shall lie down, and no one shall terrify you. Let justice and righteousness flow like a mighty stream. Let God's peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And may all of the people in the Middle East remain safe. And let us say, Amen. Amen. Now to today's program. By now, most of us know that taking individual actions like recycling or even buying solar panels for our home will not solve the climate crisis. But we know that we must do something. Today, we're going to talk about what we as individual Jews can do that will bring about the world we want. A world where everyone is safe and everyone can thrive. Our panelists will help us understand what we can do as individuals that will bring about systemic change, and they will inspire us with their own stories. At the end of this session, you'll have a chance to take action. We will be joined by Judy Burlfine of Jewish Earth Alliance to lead us in contacting our members of Congress in support of legislation that will help Americans put their individual buying power to work for systemic change. It will be an action about protection of forests around the world that must remain standing to trap carbon and protect us from further acceleration of climate change. Now, just a moment of housekeeping, as we say. Please stay muted, and if you have a question, put it in the chat. Following this Limmud Climate Symposium, Limmud will be sending out links to our organizations along with resources and discount codes to purchase the books that will be mentioned in this session. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists, but while I do that, maybe you could introduce yourselves in the chat. If you could put your name, your state or city where you live, and why did you come to this session? What are you hoping to get out of it? Our panelists are Janna Diamond, who is a somatic practitioner, intuitive healer, and cultural activist. By the way, are we pinned so you can see the four of them?
Yes.
Yeah, I see everybody. Is that right or
yes.
Not right?
The four of you should be pinned.
Very good. Okay. So Janna works with individuals and groups around the globe to cultivate emotional and spiritual resiliency in times of uncertainty. Her therapeutic practice focuses on helping people process inner responses to the climate crisis. Dr. Dana Fisher is a sociologist. She's the director of the Center for Environment, Community, and Equity, and a professor in the School of International Service at American University. She's the author of the new book, Saving Ourselves, From Climate Shocks to Climate Activism, very apt. Rabbi Rachel Kahn-Troster is Executive Vice President of the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, working with faith and values-based investors to catalyze their assets for social change. And I am Dr. Mirele Goldsmith. I'm an environmental psychologist and co-founder of Jewish Earth Alliance, a grassroots network that mobilizes Jews to advocate with the federal government for climate solutions. Thank you to our speakers. I'm so excited about this panel. Okay, are you all introducing yourselves? Excellent. Okay, so to the panelists now. You three have so much to offer, and I know it's going to be impossible to get to everything. I'm going to ask you to keep an eye on the time, as we need to wrap this up at 1 p.m. to move on to our action. And please be understanding if I use the moderator's privilege to interrupt you. to help us go deeper by bringing another perspective. So let's go first to Dana. Dana, in your new book, Saving Ourselves from Climate Shocks to Climate Action, you clearly lay out the lack of progress the world has made in stopping the downward slide to climate disaster. You say that we need radical, extensive, transformative system change. What does that mean?
Thank you. First of all, just good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for including me in this important panel. So the radical and substantial systemic change that I talk about in the book would look a lot like a real phase out of fossil fuels. And I don't mean a phase out of fossil fuels immediately, but I mean a more aggressive phase out of fossil fuels than we're seeing anywhere else, or anywhere around the world, really. So what that means is we stop subsidizing fossil fuels in our country. We start to limit the capacity for fossil fuel companies to actually drill on public lands, which is still quite available. In fact, there is a proposal to try to charge fossil fuel companies a little more so they're not getting like pennies on the millions of dollars, but that has not even been implemented. So at this point, fossil fuel companies are able to extract the public resources without really paying much to the American people. And I'm saying we shouldn't have them pay a fair rate. We should basically shut that down. That would be a really, really important push towards the type of transformation we need, along with a clean energy expansion, which we're seeing now, but we're seeing it in a slow process. And actually research shows us that while more and more people are using clean energy, we're also continuing to consume at the same proportion fossil fuel-based energy. So we're just using more energy. So what we need to do is, start to think about being more efficient while also really transforming.
That was a great answer, but I read your book, which is excellent. Everybody should read the book. And I know that you mentioned that we need even more transformative change, like an end to capitalism. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. I was trying to be pithy because you said we had to get to everybody.
Okay.
I was taking your comments to heart. Anyway, I mean, what I actually say in the book, and I would love for everybody to get access to the book. I believe there's a discount code that'll be shared at the end. In the book, I say that we actually all need to take power back to the people, and I say that unfortunately, decision makers in our country have been captured by fossil fuel interests that have privileged access both to the resources I mentioned already, but also to power because of the way that they support fossil fuel. The way that fossil fuel interests have supported elections. And this is not just Republicans. And in fact, there's research that tells us that there are lots of Democrats who take fossil fuel money. And when you look at their voting behavior, they vote based on who gives them money, not on what they say they care about. So that has to be part of a transition. And it's about people taking power back and pushing for the type of systemic change that we need, which probably will mean, a transition away from capitalism. But I'm not, I don't go as far as saying that, but rather I say that what's most important is we need true democracy and we need democratic participation for everybody that involves our taking power back. How's that?
Thank you. That's great. That was very pithy. And I think it's really important that people understand that transformative really means transformative. It's a change in our power structure. Thank you. Okay, let's go to Rachel. Rachel. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Rachel, you've been working for decades to mobilize religious communities to hold corporations accountable. Right now, it's fair to say that fossil fuel corporations are the biggest obstacle, as we've just been talking about, to governments adopting policy changes that will stop the poisoning of our atmosphere with greenhouse gases. So what kind of changes can be achieved by pressuring corporations?
That's a great question. And first of all, it's really an honor to be here, and thank you for having me. I think I started working at ICCR 3 years ago. I'd been doing human rights work, and I would be remiss to not mention, my late father, Rabbi Kahn-Troster, who was a Jewish climate activist and a founder of CODRIL. And so I always feel like when I'm speaking out on climate issues, that I'm humbly walking in his footsteps, and I know he'd be very proud of everyone gathering here today. So I'm going to start with a story about 2.5 years ago. I was at a protest outside of BlackRock, which is one of the largest asset managers. So they both are themselves invested in fossil fuels and in fossil fuel expansion, and they manage the money of a lot of people, and they put that in fossil fuels. And I was at a protest organized by Jewish Youth Climate Movement, which my older child was very active in. And I told us, I mentioned that the members of ICCR are faith-based and values-based investors. We were founded in 1971 to fight apartheid in South Africa and have continued to engage corporations on social and environmental issues. We filed our first shareholder resolution that mentioned climate change in 1989. Okay, that meant I was 10 years old, and I was standing at this protest saying, my kids who were there are the same age that I was when we filed that first shareholder proposal. And I don't want to wait. If you look at 2025, 2050 carbon neutral plans, like net zero plans, that's going to take till my grandchildren, God willing, are 10 years old. And that's a long time. And corporations have been a major part of blocking that transition. One really clear example is the Securities Exchange Commission just announced their climate disclosure rule. The Securities Exchange Commission doesn't do climate policy. We just want corporations to tell us what their transition plans are. And due to corporate lobbying, that plan was watered down. Corporations don't have to tell us as much as we want. We even had investors saying, we need to know this information just to know if a business is a good risk. If a company is telling us that their transition plan is just like, trust us, or if they're not disclosing their what their emissions are in their supply chains, like, that's important information for us to know. And even though 97% of investors supported the rule, it still got watered down because of the interference of corporations. So corporations can have a lot of influence. And although I definitely believe that, like, the most important thing is democracy and taking this back, in the absence and also alongside the need for strong government action, we also have the role of corporations. So there's a couple ways that we lobby them. One is that we insist that they tell us what their plan is to move away from, to move towards renewable energy. I think some oil and gas companies have realized that their time is coming and they need to have a clear transition plan. And others have really fought us, like Exxon, who doesn't want to meet with investors and is actually currently suing investors in Texas, who have simply asked them to disclose what their emissions are. Secondly, I think when we do engage with companies, we ask them to tell us what their transition plans are and whether they're just, whether they're we can't just move to renewable energy and decimate communities. We also, I think, a lot of transition minerals are on our native people's lands. It could destroy the environment in other ways and create chaos in communities. So we insist that corporations have a just transition plan. And also, corporations do a tremendous amount of lobbying, both themselves and through their trade associations like the Business Roundtable. So we ask corporations, one, to align their corporate lobbying along with the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, to make sure that they are, and then if they do have a lobbying plan that is aligned with that, to make sure they're positively lobbying legislatures. So there's all kinds of ways in which corporations are capturing, both having a direct impact on the environment and then also capturing our politicians, and we're pushing them through our investors to ask them to do better, to ensure that we have that they are working to solve the climate crisis.
Thank you so much. We know that some of these corporations like Exxon are bigger than countries and have more power and more money than many countries. So the work that you're doing is really connected to that taking back power. Okay, Janna, to change everything, we need everyone. As an individual, I personally experience grief, anger, anxiety, and fear when I hear how complicated this is and what we're up against. And sometimes it's overwhelming. How can we get from where we are now to a place where we feel empowered and deploy that power for systemic change?
Such a good question. First, hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you. It's like especially after everyone who just spoke, just the amount of information already, I feel I'm like, am I holding my breath? What am I noticing? So there's already all of these things that are happening at every given moment and that contribute to the overwhelm. And I'm going to speak a little bit to that. But my work is really in supporting people to build their internal capacity to meet the moment and to come out of overwhelm and find a felt sense of safety and stability in the present moment. So I bring an ecological and integrative approach to therapy. I wish there was a better word. I mean, they don't often use therapy, but it is within that context. I'm often working one-on-one with folks or in groups, really helping people to become more responsive to life. What does that really mean? Is that, like, for those of us who are paying attention, we are being affected, right? Our bodies, our hearts, our cells, like, we know things have been and are changing. What we do with that information, how we process and integrate that, is kind of like a whole growing field that I've been tending to really for the last 10, 15 years before climate psychology and climate emotions were much more of a hot topic. So clearly, climate change is having significant impacts on mental and emotional health, yet few people really know how to navigate that or to support people, and how to navigate really our inner life. I know there's a lot that organizations are beginning to do, and that spiritual communities and obviously the Jewish community is doing to tend to this. But, I find myself using the word polycrisis more and more, really to mark this convergence of crises, this like compounding overwhelm that we're not designed to process and understand this scale and scope. And this, it does rest in our physiology, because there's so much pulling for our attention that we end up overriding a lot of emotions and experiences that are coming at us constantly, right? Like this inundation of information. And these pieces really, like I said, they collect in us as stress, as pressure, of course, as overwhelm. And it's really like we're in this like sustained high stress mode or pressure cooker. And so I say that and I'm like, right, I feel my energy is a little high. And so like the speed and pace of modern life is a collective trauma, and it creates this fear and helplessness. And sometimes, I don't know how it is for you, but the voices of despair can be so loud that we can't hear anything else. And so with that, I'm going to take a breath and then slow down and begin to share also a few pieces. And Mirele, interrupt me at any point if you have questions or if you want me to, keep it a little tighter. But how we perceive something that is threatening shifts how we respond, right? So what's possible when we have a little bit more internal space and we can establish some safety and stability and begin to kind of what I call kind of like uncouple the fear and immobility responses so that we can mobilize and not just freeze and overwhelm, right? Like our freeze is not optimal for survival or taking action. And action, when I say action, it really is like action on any scale. Action is like going about our daily lives, being in relationship, being in connection with our community, with our partners, with our families. And we do not need to feel it all at once. In fact, we cannot feel it all at once. I want to like really, really underline that. And, emotions are messengers. They're calling us into a deeper knowing and listening, and into the body as a living system with its wise intelligence. And through this, we have an opportunity to really become more in touch with our own aliveness and the interconnection of all life. So I could speak to plenty of more pieces on on the different emotions that you named. Sometimes
We'll come back. We'll come back to those, okay?
Perfect. I will pause there then.
Meanwhile, I will just say, let's all take a deep breath, as Janna would recommend.
Thank you.
And process everything that already happened here. And also process that we're here together. We're here together. And I want to move to something you mentioned, which I think is a very important point, that the Jewish community, or Jews in different ways, are really stepping up to try to help people to tend to ourselves. I love that word, tend to ourselves, like the spring flowers that are coming up outside right now, so that we can make a difference and we can build that power that we need to make the change. So I'm going to go back to Rachel for a minute. Getting people to take any kind of action depends on inspiring them. In more scientific terms, it requires engaging emotion. In your experience, what are some ideas, Jewish ideas and practices that speak to Jewish hearts in a way that moves people to action? You already mentioned your father, but I have it written all out here to mention your father, our teacher, Rabbi Troster, who was really a beloved teacher and gave us the language in many ways to articulate how Jewish traditions are deeply imbued with a sense of responsibility to respect and nurture the earth and all living things. And I want to mention a resource. You can find it all over the internet in many versions, Rabbi Troster's 10 teachings about Judaism and the environment, which I still go back to very frequently. Rachel?
Sure. I think it's interesting because he and I used to often see, he would say, like, sometimes I think he was a thinker and I was a doer, but I've come around over time to, like, he was always asking, like, what is your theology of the work that you do? Like, what inspires you? And I was like, well, Judaism tells us to do things. I'm not less worried about the why, but I've been thinking a lot about the why. And it doesn't surprise, like, the fact we're doing this right before Pesach is really important to me. I think there's a well-known idea that, like, the Passover Seder is written in the we, right? Like, if you read the Torah, it's the story of Moshe and Moshe's relationship with God, and the Jewish people are around. Sometimes I feel like they're around as a character who's there to annoy people. But the Haggadah, because it's based on a text in Deuteronomy from Devarim, where they brought the first fruits, and every person tells their story, is written in the collective. And this has been on my mind a lot because there was a teaching I once read from the Howard Zinn Education Project that was talking about how we teach the civil rights movement all wrong, and that by teaching people as heroes, we make it hard, like we teach people like MLK or Rosa Parks as extraordinary people. One, we teach our children that they have to be leaders and that they have to be extraordinary. And actually, Judaism teaches us that we are all responsible and that we are all part of this movement, that we can be ourselves and be part of it. And that is what is so powerful to me. There are so many ways I can connect it to Passover, but partly because it's a story of us. And the reason it's also a story of us is it means that we can hand off the relay, we can gain strength from others, we can learn from others, and it's not all on us to solve things. We just have to be marching forward. And that is constant. I just feel that continuously, that it's not about being that big person, but it's really about that personal sense of connection to the work. And that is very, when I talk to people about why they do activism, it is understanding that personal connection, the person who inspired them, the value that they hold dear. It doesn't, like, it's simply wanting to leave the world a better place for their children or for now. And I think that is what Judaism teaches us, is that we don't have to wait for the future. We can make change now, even as we're working towards that. So that I always encourage people, you don't have to solve it yourself. You have to be working together with other people from whom you draw strength. One of my friends gave a Dvar Torah on Yom Kippur a few years ago, where she referenced Rebecca Solnit's book, one of her books about doing nuclear activism, and where Rebecca Solnit talks about finding joy with other activists. And I think that too is very Jewish, right? That the work is very hard, but if we can, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, if we can worship God through our actions with joy, that also gives us strength in the face of what feels very insurmountable.
I think you just said why I'm a Jewish activist, because while you were talking, my blood pressure went down. Thank you so much. And you really took us to where I want to go, which is about community. So the title of our panel is Leveraging Individual Power to Create Systemic Change. And I think all three of you would argue that that title left out something, a crucial mediator in the change process. Going from the individual to the systemic is the community. Now, I'm giving you a minute to think about what you want to say about that while I give a little advertisement before I move on from the Jewish teachings, which is that you'll be getting a link to a new book called The Sacred Earth, Jewish Perspectives on Our Planet. And it's a wonderfully diverse collection of essays, stories, and poems addressing Jewish responses to the threat of climate change, the desire for spirituality rooted in nature, and the changing relationships between humanity, nature, and the divine. And somebody already said that they were in the chat, that they were looking for Jewish perspective. So get this book, you're going to get a link for it. And when you get it, look for my article in it, which is How to Change Minds, Lessons from the Book of Jonah. Okay, you got all that? All right, now we're going to go back to community. Question was, what's the role of community in getting us from here to there? Who would like to go first? Raise your hand. Dana, go ahead.
Great. Well, that's a wonderful transition. And I'm really excited to read your contribution and the whole book. But I would just say that, so one of the things that I talk about and I conclude my book with is talking about what we all need to do to help us save ourselves. So there are lessons from the book, but lessons also from my research of studying climate activism over the past 25 years and climate policy making to understand where we need to go. So I just thought I would share those three, which specifically is about community. And I talk about it in terms of the way that we can leverage our power as activists, first and foremost by creating community and solidarity, not just within our own communities, but across communities. And I use examples from both the civil rights movement, and I think, Rachel, what you were saying about the civil rights movement was really helpful there. In fact, there's some really interesting new work that has come out about the way that the history of the civil rights movement has become idealized so that we don't actually see the grittiness that was the movement. That makes it much harder for us to think about how we personally can connect. But so I talk about that in my book, but I also talk about more recently findings from research that I did around the Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd was murdered, where we found that there was this amazing level of intersectionality and solidarity within the crowds of people who mobilized around the United States. It was the largest sustained activism in US history. And there are lots of lessons we can learn from that. In addition to that, as Jews, I think that we should think about how we can connect with other religious communities, but also labor and other folks who care about very similar issues, but aren't necessarily connected. The other thing I'll say, I'll skip one of them, but I can tell that later if people are interested, but just so I don't take too much time, is that one of the other final findings that I suggest at the end, and it actually has led to some other writing more recently, is about cultivating resilience. And when I talk about resilience here, a lot of us, when we think about the climate crisis, we think about environmental resilience in terms of making our communities capable of withstanding the kind of extreme weather and climate shocks we're going to see. For example, my synagogue just put in permeable surfaces all throughout its asphalt so that it can handle storms better, so that parts of the synagogue that have flooded won't continue to flood. That's an example of the kind of actions that will create more resilience. But we don't just have to be cultivating environmental resilience. We also need to be creating and cultivating social resilience. And that is so that we can prepare for our communities being, hurt both emotionally, but then also physically by climate shocks, because climate change is not just going to hurt our environments, it's going to hurt our communities. Some people will be unhoused. Some people will need food. They will need schooling for their children. They'll need childcare. And we as communities are much more able to create strong ties within our communities to help withstand what's coming. And we know it's coming. It's very well documented in the scientific research. So I think in terms of building community, it's about creating both the social ties, but then the social ties that make it possible to do the kind of environmental actions we need.
I'm sure that Janna wants to jump in next.
Yeah, so similar, and it's really interesting to look at like how we're coming in with different lenses, because how I might describe it is to say that everything is relationship, right? So how we are in relationship with ourselves, our awareness of how we're moving and perceiving and relating to really everything is also how we are engaging in relationship in our communities, right? So how we treat each other, how we speak to each other, how much consciousness and awareness we're bringing around the care and really care work, right? As we are nurturing communities that can be resilient, it's coming from a sense of, well, like I am considering how I'm responding, and this goes back to, like our ability to respond, responsibility. And how we're deepening in skill around these different areas. So, and I also just want to say, because of this, I almost want to add that while there is, sure, tons of data, and we all are very well versed, I imagine. Like, we're still co-creating everything in this moment, and you can't let anyone tell us that we know what's going to happen, because I am like such a firm believer that relationships can shift everything like in each micro moment. So that is communal, that is like deep communal and collective work.
Thank you. I want to invite you to start putting your questions in the chat for later. And I asked the panelists if they would prepare a question for each other. So how about if I go to Rachel? Rachel, do you have a question for the other panelists?
I think one question that I'm always asking people is what is giving them hope in this moment? Because I think it is very easy to feel, even despite everything I've said, to feel despair, which I think is a reasonable reaction. I don't think that actually that's something we should ignore. I think if we tell people their despair is unwarranted, I work with teenagers who have climate anxiety, and how do you tell them that that's not real? But I love to tell other people stories of hope. And so I would love to know what's giving my other panelists hope right now.
Who'd like to go?
I can
Janna?
go. And
Okay,
Janna, do you want to
Dana.
go first?
Just because I just spoke, so if you want to.
Okay, Dana, you go first.
I'll give you a moment to breathe,
Okay,
Janna.
it's fine.
Well, actually, so it's interesting. So what's giving me hope is the ways that young and elder people alike are starting to mobilize and use innovative tactics to join together to push for addressing the climate crisis. We just saw the recent Climate Grannies success in Europe, but more recently we've seen Climate Grannies here in the United States pushing for social change. We've seen folks involved in Third Act. We've seen young people getting involved in a whole range of ways. Some of it's doing bird dogging, but others are pushing for, electric school buses in communities. And I think all of that is really, really gives me hope. I mean, the other thing that I would just gonna throw out there is that within, one of the things that gives me hope, and this is gonna seem kind of strange, is that I am finding it really wonderful how people are starting to get angry. And one of the things that those of us who study climate activism, climate protests know is that anger is a great mobilizer, and it actually has been well documented to get people out in the streets and get people to start pushing for the kind of social change we need. So while obviously, people are going to feel their emotions, they need to process their emotions, but we shouldn't be shying away from feeling angry, because anger has been a really useful emotion for getting people to work together in the past. And I expect that it will be doing the same in the future.
Okay, Janna, you're up.
We absolutely need anger. And I also, Rachel, just want to say, just so we don't get too far from that, we want to like validate everyone's despair and all of the feelings and things, and as a sign of our aliveness, and that we are like here and now, which also brings me to a sense of like, I tend to personally not use the word hope. My sense of it is being very future focused, and I continue to come, okay, like what's right here in the present moment. And so I want to name that to say, like, I sense in my own body and with what we're witnessing of like people coming together right now, and kind of things feel like they're continuing to be unveiled, right? We're seeing more, we're feeling more and more people are having conversations, we're singing more, the groups are gathering. It's like all the ways that communities are tending, continuing to go back to that word, to the fabric of these days, right? And these times. And so like I am enlivened and filled with like possibility and by visions that are happening. I know the vision tends to be forward. We like need the creativity, right, in the present moment to create the vision for what's possible. And that feels hopeful / really enlivening and like soul nurturing.
I love the phrase that Joanna Macy uses about active hope, which is more in the moment. It's the hope that you get from being active, not the hope that you don't know. Like you said, you don't know what's going to happen. Okay, Dana, do you have a question for your sister panelists here?
I do for my sister panelists. So one of the things that so I'm currently wrapping up a book tour, and I've been all over the country talking to people. I've had a lot of youth climate activists who have joined me for conversations around the country, and 50% of them, like literally half of them, are saying that they are telling their friends and co-activists, youth activists, not to vote in the 2024 election. And I would like my my sister panelists to talk about maybe if you can think through and help to, you know, brainstorm. What do you think we should do about this? I mean, what's your advice around the election, and what do you think we should do about encouraging and inspiring young people to take advantage of their opportunities to have their voices heard?
This is a really big problem. And I think it's actually one that's really important to respect, because I think, especially for people who are center, left, we've been told for the past number of years that we're voting against. We've been mobilizing people through fear, and that's not enough. People want to be told what they're voting for. So one, I think it's really important to tell people what they're voting for. You know, and maybe that's not the top of the ticket. I actually think it's really important that there are a number of down ballot races that can inspire people. So like, I'm in New Jersey. I'm really excited about Andy Kim for Senate. So I might like get people fired up about that. So to get them to the polls, I think that's really hard. Or, you know, if there are ballot initiatives, like in Florida, I think there's a pro-choice ballot initiative. So I think that that's very important, because you need to respect the fact that people are frustrated with our politicians. They're frustrated that they're not selling them on a message of what they're voting for. And instead, rather than trying to argue them out of that position, respect that. And then say, well, okay, we're not going to argue about why this person doesn't work for you. Let's talk to you about the people who do work for you, and how do we mobilize them. I think that we're seeing that around the country, where people will turn out if there is something that inspires them. But we shouldn't try and fool them into thinking that the people who don't inspire them are actually inspiring. But instead, and I think that we're going to see that around the country, that there's going to be a tactic where people are like, okay, these are the things that we care about. How are these on the ballot? Because it does feel like the political process is really stymied. It does feel like, you know, like the politicians are working for someone else. But I also, so again, like really, again, leaning into what people value and helping them to articulate. There's this great podcast called Words to Win By, which is about progressive campaigns around the world and how they have messaged winning campaigns. And one of their campaigns that I think in season 2 that they talk about is the 2018 Greater Than Fear campaign in Minnesota, which is what brought Ilhan Omar and Keith Ellison became the Attorney General, and how they overcame the politics of fear to create community. And I think there's a lot we can learn from thinking about campaigns that really spoke to the values that people had and inspired them to get to the polls for those, rather than just simply saying vote because it's scary. And I think for our young people especially, that is what they want to hear, because also that's the only way to persuade them that change is possible.
Okay. Janna, do you have a question for your sister?
Can I respond real quick on that question?
Take the privilege.
That was so well articulated. I don't know actually if I have much to add to that. But you know, because I want to validate everything that folks are feeling, and you know, in my dream world, people would have like less inhibition and be able to like, you know, get together and like stomp and say like no and feel their resistance, and like let that actually take up some more space and let the anger like, you know, grow in a way that feels contained and safe. Luckily I get to do this in groups that I lead, and that's kind of part of creating that inner transformation that, oh my goodness, I don't have to hold back these feelings that I'm not supposed to or I shouldn't have. And actually to say like, no, like let's bring the impulses forward, right? And like from there, even in that moment, it's like, what can we create, right? And this goes back to what I had said earlier, and then what some of the threads that we're pulling at is that vision for like, no, what are we creating? It's not enough just to resist or say no, you know, to what our options are, what's already here. It's like, okay, what else are we making here? Like, what are we making together? So Yeah. Shall I transition to a question?
Sure.
Okay. I had some variation of Raphael's first one, although I didn't, and I think we answered that. So what I would love to do is ask my fellow panelists and invite participants and witnessers and people that are here with us to also consider something similar and to put in in the chat so that we can all bear witness as well to what is a resource for you right now? Where do you find yourself going for safety and comfort? It could be a place, a person, could be anything that comes to mind.
One of the panelists like to speak to that? Well, while you're thinking, I'll speak to it. I am a very urban person, but I find the longer I'm involved in this work, the more I'm interested in being in nature. And I know many people who are active in the environmental movement, that's how they got their start. I'm coming to it later in life. And it really ties together a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. I've all of a sudden developed a passion that I'm going to become a guerrilla gardener. And that's because I see what's happening in my own neighborhood, and I think I can make a difference. But after a couple of days of thinking about it, I realized that there was really no way I could do it alone. So now I'm recruiting some of my neighbors to help out with that. And I always think that if you take action individually and at home, it makes you feel more legitimate in speaking to others about it, talking to others about it, and asking for change on a systemic level. So I really think that it's all connected. Okay, who else? Dana.
Great. Well, I think that's a wonderful question. I mean, I would just, I was just, mentioning challenges that I've found with talking to youth climate activists. The flip side of that is that where I get my most inspiration is from talking to my children at home and my students. I mean, my students I currently am teaching graduate students at the School of International Service. I'm teaching a class called Environment and Activism. And so it's all about, understanding the literature and what we know about activism and how we can then use it for many of these students or master's students who are going to go on to work for nonprofits or for social movement organizations. And many of them came to me really frustrated, having been involved in the big mobilization on TikTok against the Willow Project. And many of them felt like they really got involved and they were shocked how unsuccessful their mobilization was. And so we've learned a lot and talked a lot about that. And my students have grown so much over this semester, and just having them talk and debate one another it's inspiring. And so, I mean, whenever I start to feel worried about where the world's going, I just get to have this. I mean, luckily I get to have these conversations with my students once a week, and we talk about it and I learn what they're doing, and they're all doing it in their own ways, but it's inspiring. So that.
Rachel, would you like to add?
I also take tremendous inspiration from being in nature, but it's not just being outside. I'm a late in life runner, and part of why I took it up about a decade ago was to be outside more and to see places, because I was tired of traveling for activism and traveling for work, but only spending my time in rooms and never connecting to the place that I was in. But I also think that running has taught me so many things. It has taught me, one, that everybody is part of it. Like, you cannot tell anything about a runner by looking at them. You have to let go of your ego if you're competing against others, unless you're like an elite runner. Like, your first race, you will be passed by everyone you do. And but rather than be like, isn't it great that we're all here together, right? And that's what I've learned from running. It's really allowed me to be in places where I just stop for a moment and say, this is really beautiful, and this is really, and I think it's a daily reminder for me, as probably my spiritual practice, that I can be stronger than I am, and sometimes that I'm not as strong as I think I am. I mean, I never know what that's like when I get up in the morning. but I think so it has definitely become a metaphor for how we connect to others, how I am in the world. And to remember that I think also that nature is not separate from us. It is what happens when we step outside our door, and just finding all those moments to connect to the world, to root us in what matters, looking around and being able to say, like, I was like thinking about the eclipse last week, right? And how we all were in a collective experience of awe that simply required, okay, yes, I know there are some people who traveled far, but for many of us, it just required stepping outside. And I was outside, on the one hand, wondering how all these people could be driving around and not stopping, but I was also out with a bunch of teenagers who were just so excited to be seeing this moment. And we don't get those collective moments of action a lot. And I think it can inspire us to say, like, yes, we can all be part of something even for a moment. I was on a Zoom call with a woman who was telling us about like right-wing corporate activism while she was like outside and stare at the eclipse. And it's like, this is such an incredible moment of recognizing that we can all be part of something bigger than ourselves.
I love that. And I have to tell you that when I was trying to decide what to do for the eclipse, what occurred to me was that a good Jew has to go see the eclipse. To miss this moment of awe for creation, to see what the universe, see how the universe works would just be the most un-Jewish thing you could possibly do. Okay, I have a question here for Dana from our audience. It's from Mark. And the question is, what climate policies do you believe would be viable for accelerating greenhouse gas emissions reduction under the current capitalist system, and alternatively under a post-capitalist system? What's the difference in what we could expect?
Well, so I mean, the thing is, it's not just about the capitalist system, it's about the political structure and the way politics works within the capitalist system. I mean, and I particularly think that, policies like the Citizens United decision that basically gives corporations the capacity to have a huge role in our elections is making a big difference. I mean, it's driven by capitalism for sure, but it's making a big difference in what is feasible and what's not feasible politically right now. So, I mean, that's a great question. I was thinking about it when I saw it come up in the chat, because, I have studied all the failed efforts to regulate CO2 emissions that have gone through the Congress since the 1990s. So I have written so many papers on failed policy efforts, all the way, through Waxman-Markey, the Clean Power Plan, all the way back to Climate Security Act. I mean, so all of them. So anybody who's interested, if you go to my website, you can download all the PDFs. I was so delighted to be able to write about the Inflation Reduction Act when it passed. And we have a paper now under review on that one. But the problem is that that's completely insufficient for getting us where we need to go, because you can't just rule with carrots, you need to rule with sticks, right? So carrots are throwing money into clean energy, and it is helping to expand clean energy capacity, but it's not phasing out fossil fuels, which is what we need to do. So when you ask me what's feasible in our capitalist system, I mean, I think that a carbon tax, a BTU tax, like the Clinton administration tried so many years ago, or even a cap and trade bill would all be very effective. But I don't know that they're politically feasible. I mean, in fact, they're currently not politically feasible. We could not get that through the Congress. You might be able to do something like that at the subnational level in the state house. And I think that's someplace that people should be looking to try to implement these kinds of policies, because we absolutely need to penalize those who are burning the most fossil fuels. And we have to figure out a way to do that. Now, if we were outside of a capitalist system, I mean, if we were to start to take back some of the power that businesses have, the first and foremost thing I would do is I would get rid of all subsidies that encourage fossil fuel extraction in our country. That means you have to pay. First of all, you cannot extract on public lands. And second of all, you do not get subsidized access to lands to extract. You have to pay the actual cost. And that would transition us away from fossil fuels so much faster, because clean energy is cheaper. I mean, we all keep telling everybody that, but the problem is it's cheaper, but then fossil fuel interests are being subsidized, so they are not paying a fair cost. So that's what I would do.
I want to recognize Dr. Myron Katz, who's putting some really interesting, thought-provoking things in the chat. And Myron, I want to say to you, if we cut out those subsidies, think of all the money that'll be available for the carrots, right? But let me ask a question that Myron put in the chat. I'll rephrase it a little bit. He said, what is the love in the Shema? What can we learn from the Shema and the emphasis in our prayers and in our tradition on love that can help us to respond to this current crisis? I'm going to ask Rabbi Rachel because you're the rabbi.
I think that love is like a reminder of what binds us together. And I think it's a that it is part of our contract with each other. I think I don't always know that it's a good way to change people's minds, right? Like I think people don't change because we've convinced them. We change the political calculus and make it worthwhile. I mean, I think there's a whole question like, if you look at the marriage equality movement, which directly correlated with changes in public opinion, whether that was an outlier, actually, in terms of making change, that usually you have to make the change and then public sentiment follows. But the love is what motivates us to do the work to make the change. And also enables us to have sympathy for the people who are coming later to it. I think if we simply demonize the other, it's hard because we have that anger, we have that love, right? So like there are many moments where there are various areas I work on where I can both be frustrated and angry with people because they haven't come to what I think is the right decision sooner. But the love is what it says, and welcome, thank God you're here, right? And it's holding those two things in tension that I think is very important, and that what we learn from Jewish tradition is it's love and it's repentance, right? It is that like when people repent, the love in our hearts is what enables that to hear us sincerely, even though there's part of us like, now you're here, but okay, you're here, let's move forward together.
What I was thinking when you said that was, wouldn't it be nice if there was just a silver bullet and there was one thing that was the answer to everything? It's a very, very complicated thing, very, very complicated. And we each have to find our role. That's part of being, I think Janna spoke to that earlier on. Each of us has to find our place in it. Okay, Scott Lewis is asking us, what are you three going to do at your Pesach Seders? Are you going to bring something in about climate? And if so, what?
Well, I'm going to put my 16-year-old on the spot. I know that they were writing something for Jewish Youth Climate Movement about the Seder. I don't know what it is, but they're going to have to share it. And I also think that, I haven't figured out what we're going to do on our Seder plate to symbolize climate, but I'm sure it will come up because we do like to bring all of the values and that we hold into our Seder. So haven't figured it out yet, but I definitely think, I also just, because Pesach is the spring holiday and it's the holiday of movement and rebirth. And so that I think should inspire us to say that like the world is waking up. Can we wake up with it?
Janna.
Yeah, to add a few things, I would say like there's a real opportunity for togetherness and intentionality in terms of each moment together, right? And in like, I'm gonna see if we're just gonna come pull some of these threads. It's like, is our heart open as we're making the meal, right? Are we listening to one another around the table? Like, how are we honoring where everything has come from? Where are the origins, right? And even just expanding our contextual frame of what we might tend to do in terms of like, are we not just going through the motions? Are we creating something together, like here and now? And really honoring like where everyone's come from, what everyone might be coming in with, all the feelings and the backlog of things that maybe people haven't felt. And what does it look like to create belonging at the table together, which is like belonging on the earth, right?
That's wonderful. I'm going to call on Rabbi Fred Sherlin-Derdab. I bet you've thought about what you're going to do at your Pesach Seder. Would you like to share something?
Thank you so much. Thank you all. This is remarkable. So there's so much going on in the world, and one thing is to take the cup of our joy, and traditionally we take a little bit out to recognize the pain of others. We need to do that around the Middle East, and we need to do that around climate. That's on the sort of negative side. On the positive side, to kind of emphasize that liberation it frees us all. And even we who disproportionately benefit from the capitalist structures that Dana reminds us we haven't yet dismantled and will make a huge difference when we do. And Rachel's trying really hard, Rachel, but that liberation also holds out a promise, and we need the joy along with the nudge.
That's wonderful. Thank you. You know, this reminds me of, yes, Dana, go ahead.
Let me just chime in here. First of all, Rabbi Dobb, I love what you were saying about bringing this in as we pour off a little bit of the wine. Apparently, I'm the only person who has elder family members who are going to come in pushing very hard against regulating climate change and in support of Donald Trump. So I will be, and I know a lot of other Jewish families where there is a couple of elder people particularly who come in with particular perspectives. So for us, it's a lot more challenging in terms of talking about what's going on in Israel and in the Middle East, and also in terms of talking about climate change. So I think I'm going to take advantage of thinking about how, when we talk about plagues, we kind of bring it in there. But I have to say that it's not a universal that we can talk about at our table in the same way. So I'm envious of all of you, but if anybody has insights, feel free to share, because we're always looking for insights around the family meals.
Yes, everyone, please put your ideas into the chat. I know we have some really wise people here about how to bring these issues up on Pesach or at other times in family conversations. I wanted to just say that this really reminded me of something that happened to me a few years ago. I was asked to give an environmental justice tour. Leaving aside why I was giving the environmental justice tour, we finished the tour on the top of the, I think it's called the North River Wastewater Treatment Plant in New York, which was actually a community benefit project that was given to the community in Harlem because of all of the harm that was going to be caused and was caused by the placement of this wastewater treatment plant in Harlem on the Hudson River. But as we stood on the top of this, they turned the top into a park. As we stood up there with a group of teenagers, I told them about Pete Seeger and his boat, and how he was one of the people, along with the fishermen, by the way, to create a movement to clean up the Hudson River. And talked about the clean water laws that were passed in the 1970s, and how now the Hudson River is a lot cleaner than it was back in the day. And at the end of the program, I asked the young people, what did they learn from this whole tour? And you know what they said? They said, we learned that things sometimes can get better. And I think that's something that we all need to hold on to. Things can get better. And as Janna said, we don't know exactly how and when, and maybe they're going to get worse before they get better, as Dana said, but if we keep at it and we organize, as Rachel can teach us, they will get better. I want to really thank all the panelists. I'm going to ask each of you to, everybody here in the audience, can you turn on your video for a minute so that the panelists can see your appreciation? Maybe you could give them a, I think this was a wonderful, thought-provoking panel. And if you're inspired, we're going to ask you to stay on now for a few minutes to join us in taking action. We're going to walk you through the process. It'll just take 5 minutes, and you will have made a difference. So now I'm going to introduce Judy Burlfine of Jewish Earth Alliance, who's going to lead us through this action of contacting our members of Congress. Judy, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you, Mirele, for asking people to put their video on, because now is the time where you participate and it's great to see your face. So I'm going to share my screen and we will move forward. So I am on the steering committee with Mirele, with the Jewish Earth Alliance, and we meet once a month, and for a informative webinar, and then we, at the end of each webinar, we take action to either support bills in Congress or write comments to the EPA or write to the president. And today we are going to do the same and start by seeing the slide in front of us about protecting forests. And why are forests important for climate change? Because they are absorbing so much of the CO2 that we are emitting. In fact, a fact that I learned this morning is that the forests around the world absorb roughly about 1.5 times as much CO2 as we here in the US emit each year. So protecting forests around the world is important for stabilizing our climate. Okay, so what we can protect forests here in the US, but indirectly we can protect forests outside of the US. And I'm guessing many of you have faced the same dilemma that I sometimes face when I go to purchase a product. I wonder, where did it come from and what trees were cut down for this? Does it have palm oil in it? And are they illegally cutting down trees to put up palm plantations? But also not just palm oil, but my beloved chocolate. Where does it come from? And we all really want to do the right thing, and sometimes it's hard to know how to do it. So a bill was introduced in 2023 called the Forest Act, and it was in response to the knowing that we are losing more than 16 million acres of forest a year. And we have co-sponsors in the Senate and in the House. We have one new co-sponsor in addition to those who introduced the bill, and 25 in the House. And the way the bill works is it prohibits importation of products that are made or produced on illegally deforested land. And like I mentioned, that includes palm oil or soybeans, cocoa, or I can't see the bottom here, so you
Cattle.
Cattle, thank you. Got to move everything around so you can see things. So what we're going to do today is take action and write to our senators on their websites to ask them to become co-sponsors of this bill. And let's see. So this lists all of the co-sponsors in the House, the 25 of them. Have been looking at where all of you are from to see if I can get an idea if any of your House members are supporting it. But this list, the top is California, where there are the most co-sponsors. It was introduced originally by House member Blumenauer from Oregon. We do have one person here from Oregon, so I don't know if you're in Blumenauer's district. Two sponsors in Illinois, and then we do have one Republican from Pennsylvania, Brian Fitzpatrick. All the rest are Democrats, and then individual co-sponsors from all the rest of these states. And I'm not going to keep this up here, but you can find this online, because hopefully after you write to your senator, you will also write to your House member. So the bill was introduced by Brian Schatz from Hawaii and Mike Braun from Indiana. I don't think we have anyone from Hawaii or Indiana on this call. So now is where you are involved. We're going to take action now. And what this involves is opening up a tab on your browser right now and go to one of your senator's websites. So for instance, I'm in California, Senator Padilla and Senator Butler are both my senators. So I would go to padilla.senate.gov. So once you get to the website, there'll be a place where you can contact your senator. So why don't you go ahead now and open up a tab and go to one of your senators' websites and see if you can find the place on the website where it says to contact. So I'll give you a minute to do that. And then once you get there, I'll share the message that we would like to share with them. Okay, so once you're on the website and you see how to contact your senator, there'll usually be a drop-down menu for the subject. So this could be related to climate, environment, anything that seems appropriate for the co-sponsoring the Forest Act. And the very simple message that you can, simple sample message that I'm suggesting that you write, and I can even copy, oh, maybe I can't. Maybe someone can copy it and put it in the chat. Is Americans want to do the right thing. I
put it in the chat already.
Thank you, Mirele. We don't want to buy products from deforested land. So help us avoid supporting deforestation. Limit imports produced on illegally deforested land. Please co-sponsor the Forest Act. So, and of course, you're free to add on to that. You're free to add on something about why it's Jewish to care about forests and trees. Add a personal story about why stabilizing the climate is important to you. But if you want to keep it really simple, you can just, have those few sentences that I suggest here. And so I'll give you a minute to do that. And once you've sent one, let us know in the chat that you've succeeded. And if you have questions, you can unmute and ask your question. And if you finish submitting one, go to your other senator site and submit another one, and then go to your House member site and submit another one.
Great suggestion, Janna. As soon as you finish, put the name of the senator in the chat that you contacted. Let's see all the people that we've contacted. In case you're wondering if this makes a difference, maybe Judy was going to say this, but I happened to be on a panel, as the audience, I was participating in a webinar with an elected just this week. And someone asked her why a certain bill did not pass. And she said, well, it didn't pass. I think there wasn't enough public support. She said, in my office, I supported the bill, but in my office, I received 200 messages against the bill and only 7 for the bill. It's hard to believe that such a small number of messages actually makes a difference, but it really does. It really can make a difference. Judy, you want to close us out?
Sure. Well, we've done an amazing job. I've counted up like almost a dozen emails have been sent, and I trust the rest of you will send more as soon as we hang up. And I want to reiterate what Mirele says, sometimes you feel like you're sending off into some vacuum that you don't know where it goes, but there really are people at the other end, and they appreciate us bringing all of these issues to their attention. So thank you all.
Let me say thank you again to our panelists and all of you for participating, to Suzanne for being our Zoom Rabbi, and for please convey to the rest of the Limmud staff and board how much we appreciated this opportunity. And
I will. I want to thank you all very much. Our next session starts really soon, and there are sessions Monday and Tuesday, and I hope we can see you on all of those sessions. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you all for being here. Our next session starts in a few minutes at 1:30 Eastern time, so we hope we'll see you then. And I just want to thank everybody again, and we're going to close out this session. Thank you, Mirele. Thank you all on our panel. Really appreciate it. Chag Sameach. Happy Passover to everybody. I'm going to close this out now.